Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Flavio Aggio. Given the worldwide health crisis, Flavio has one of the toughest and most critical roles in cybersecurity today, Chief Information Security Officer of the World Health Organization. True to hope form, Flavio and I met this past March when my law firm detected a state-sponsored and ultimately unsuccessful attack on the WHO. Since then, we've become friends and colleagues, and through this friendship, I've learned that Flavio really puts the W into WHO. He's a citizen of Brazil, Italy, and the United States with the background in physics, information technology, and cybersecurity. Flavio has done some truly amazing work with the manufacturing and semiconductor industries, as well as international organizations, and held posts in the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Brazil. And oh yeah, he was also the CTO of the city of San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Flavio Aggio.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Alex, and hopefully we'll continue to update each other on the journey of cybersecurity. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to all of you, and we'll be able to have questions and answers towards the end. And hopefully
hey, what's up, nerds? Somebody in here should give me streaming rights into here, and I'll stream you my stream deck of a Hope Conference as I live mix it. You gotta give me streaming rights though.
Nice. How do we do that? Let's see.
Well, no, I can do that, but you still. Well, actually, so if I wanted a camera, it's the same rights. Screen share and video share are the same rights. I am part of Red Team Village, so technically you just put that on there. I need that role anyway. We're currently doing these. We're currently doing the CISO of the WHO. Yeah.
So you tell me when I should start.
Flavio, you are live. Please proceed.
All right. So yeah. So as I said, thank you very much for the opportunity. We're going to have questions towards the end. I don't want to go too tight to the presentation that I prepared for this conference, but I'd like to share a couple of things with you. The first one and the most important one is what WHO works worldwide to promote health, to keep the world safe, and to serve the vulnerable. Those are the three pillars that we work for, and very proud to work for this organization. And the idea here is to really share the COVID-19 cybersecurity attacks and what technologies related to protect, detect, respond, recover, very extremely important, but not sufficient. You know, when we had multiple attacks in different times was a little bit different, but the number of attacks that we started to receive when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic increased dramatically. And what gave me a very clear notion that technology by itself cannot really be sufficient. So we need to think about human OS upgrade, because what I mean is IT people, security people, and users need to think differently. The way that we rely on technology 100% is the wrong way, and the way that users may rely 100% on IT is wrong as well. We need to reach a balance, and it is not only about training, awareness, because in my experience with multiple departments in WHO, with the public, what I see is the lack of understanding and how technology works and how online world works. So it came to me that we need to really change the behavior of the users online and change the behaviors of the IT community. And we must openly acknowledge systems vulnerabilities. In another way, what I'm trying to say is humans are the weakest and the strongest links in cybersecurity. What I mean by that is when you use a system, the user is the first line of defense. And if the user doesn't understand the implication of those actions, is very difficult to defend an organization or a system. But on the other hand, users, IT produces software, and software is really written by humans. Therefore, they have intrinsic vulnerabilities. So that's the reason I see as the strongest links and the weakest links, and we need to really change that. And coincidentally, I like the term human OS. I was not the one that created. I don't know who created that term. I heard in a training, and based on my background, humanos in Portuguese, as an example, is written in the same way. So the human operating system. So if you put lowercase o and s, it is precisely human in plural in Portuguese language and Spanish as well. So it's interesting to think in that way, because we need to really not look at only from the technology side and not look at only on the training and awareness when we are talking about cybersecurity. So this is the important component for my presentation. So I try to show to you what are the important parts from the technology side and important parts from the human side. And the human side impacts the users and also the IT community. So in trying to stress that, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we had a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks. It was like a flood, incredible flood. And if we didn't have 9 key important components of the integrated cybersecurity program, we would be in trouble. So I'm listing here all the things that I believe that were essential, especially during the pandemic. The notion of identity management, the privileged access management, very important. More important is the multi-factor authentication. So when Alex was describing in the introduction, unsuccessful attempts was only unsuccessful because we precisely had multi-factor authentication for our system. So quite important. Another one is password management solution for IT professionals and users. So I'm gonna pause here and tell you a story. During the COVID-19 pandemic declaration, and right after, we detected that APTs were not only trying to target WTO users in the WTO environment, but also on their personal environment, in the social media, in accounts elsewhere, with the hope that they could load code or trying to find ways to do a parallel jump, and in teaching the users password management and enabling multi-factor authentication in their personal lives is quite important. So I'm going to go back to the slide and continue with the other items. This one is an important one that we started last year with a business case quite important to enable an integrated SOC, Security Operations Center, with the SIM, the Security Information and Event Management, vulnerability management, including patch management, threat intelligence. Think internal and external. If we don't do that, quite difficult. And antivirus is something from the past. You need to have endpoint detection response for any device. desktops, laptops, servers, phones, smartphones, and tablets. And global proxy for any device. So when a user goes to a conference, to a hotel, home, doesn't matter where, at least the manageability of the access to the internet is controlled, and the endpoint detection is established, and all that integrated with the SOC. And by doing that, you'll be able to really quickly detect and quickly respond to attacks. I'm going to go back to the slide. Another thing that was quite important, when we started to see COVID-19 in the media, and WHO started to really make the announcements, we saw a huge increase of email impersonations. So just for you to have an idea, from all the internet email that was being sent, 70% was impersonation. And we needed to fight that with technology, and we implemented in 30 days DMARC, domain-based message authentication reporting conformance, and we dropped all those 70% impersonations. So this was quite important for us, and I ask you, IT professional, hacker, ethical hacker, government entity, companies, let's all together implement DMARC in all email systems, and perhaps make DMARC required in order for email to work. And with that, we can eliminate the email impersonation that we suffered quite a lot. People impersonating at WHO.int, and it was very difficult for the receiver to distinguish. So with DMARC on, again, we implemented in 30 days, we dropped a lot of emails that shouldn't be even generated. So I ask for your help, and I have multiple people working with me to really put that campaign. Let's make DMARC mandatory. So back to the slide, email advanced threat protection. Most of the attacks that we observed, 90% or plus, they are related to links and attachments. So I urge you to think about solutions. There are several in the market. Do your research. We are doing ours to implement safe links and attachments. And by doing that, we will be able to really avoid a lot of attacks. And the last two to complete the 9 recommendations is remote access via a browser. Make sure that we drop all the clients, avoid all the clients to do remote access. The browser base is way better. And the last one is legacy, but still necessary. VPN and firewalls, very important, but we are moving away from that because we are adopting a zero trust strategy. The idea is there is no perimeter. Perimeter goes to the endpoint. So with that is the technology aspect. And I didn't include everything. I included only the key ones. So the next slide, it is related to the technology is not enough. We need to upgrade the human OS. So when working for WHO, we realized that we needed to dedicate a lot of time in the cybersecurity awareness program. So we had multiple trainings, online training, briefings, questions and answers, and regular phishing exercise. What I mean by regular? So we adopted the monthly phishing exercise, and we had a percentage of users, let's say 4,000 users per quarter, that we randomly selected, and we sent phishing exercise to their mailbox. And for the users that clicked on the link, we repeated. We generated another phishing exercise for the next month. And then the ones that clicked it twice, on the third month, we sent it another one. And for those that clicked it 3 times, we had a one-on-one conversation to understand how can we help them to understand what is needed and what they can help us to improve our awareness program. And with that, we improved a lot the understanding from our users and how to inspect, how to not fall for those phishing. Important is to have a policy, overall policy to handle cybersecurity from all aspects and make that policy available and really communicate to the entire organization. And the third component is a very important integrated risk management. So risk can be seen as not only a cyber risk, but a risk to the organization, and how to connect that into the governance of the risk for the organization. So integrating that risk management from the cybersecurity side to the organization, very important. So understanding how those 3 bullets really play along with IT professionals and users is one way to really upgrade the human OS. But not only that, we need to do way more to improve our defenses. And how I put together 7 recommendations and how you can do that in your organization. And the important component is to really manage the risk by changing the behavior from IT professionals and users. So you have to work on both sides. Implement and maintaining a cybersecurity awareness program that I mentioned before, quite important. One thing that we started to do and makes a huge difference is to build a red and a blue team. The red team is creating all the checks, and the blue team, the balances that are needed. We are in the beginning in that journey. The red team is being formed and makes a huge difference, especially during the pandemic. And I recommend all organizations to think about the creation and start with the red team, and the blue team will be born, because that creates the checks and balances necessary. The fourth item is to recognize and mitigate IT products and processes vulnerabilities. So we need to really identify the risk owner and understand that IT products will always be, and processes as well, we're going to have vulnerabilities. How many times you're being requested to upgrade software every time? And how many times attacks happen because software is not up to date? Many. So we need to recognize that and bake that into IT professionals and users. The logical continuation is to promote and perform software updates continuously. In order to fight, you need to enable rapid response. So when an attack happens, how can users communicate in a faster way, and technology can communicate in a faster way so we can really respond. And the last one is an important one, and I don't want to stress who the CISO reports to. I just wanted to make sure everybody recognizes, and we need to address the potential conflict of interest. IT wants to do things, wants to enable the organization to make more money, to be more efficient, to do this or that. And cybersecurity wants to really protect the organization, manage to a risk level. So creating that balance is important, and make sure that we recognize a potential conflict of interest is the first element to upgrade the human OS. Continue with the denial that cybersecurity and IT, there are no conflicts, will not help anyone. So there's a conflict, because if you want it to be 100% secure, one, it's impossible. And if you want it to be absolutely efficient without security, that's not possible either. So the balance needs to exist. The last part is I wanted to really help people, and this is what I do in WHO. And the best way to help people is to help the individual and their family. Because if they are better protected, and if they do that at home, they're going to do that at work. So the first is we promote the use of long and unique passwords for every services. So we recommend passphrase and a unique password for each system, so personal or work. The normal question we receive from users is, how can I memorize so many passwords? So we promote the use of Password Vault. With that, the user can generate a very good long password, unique password, and we give suggestions that you can see on the slide. And the third element is to really make sure everybody uses dual-factor authentication. Sometimes is being called two-step verification. Always use hard or soft token, and we give suggestions when soft token is used. So Google or Microsoft Authenticator and your smartphone. So those are the three basic tips that we give to our employees and to help themselves and their families. So just to wrap it up, as I said, technology is not enough to protect anyone in a normal state or when we have a pandemic situation. We have to really get together to change the behavior. It is not only about training. It's also, of course, training awareness are a component, but we need to recognize those points that I mentioned before and work with the IT community as I'm doing now. And we have to really communicate in an open way and acknowledge systems vulnerabilities. Again, humans are the weakest and strongest links in cybersecurity, and we are the ones that responsible for code that are running in our lives, but also we are responsible to make sure that users understand and they can make their decisions in the best way so we can be protected. So with that, I'd like to really open for questions. As I said, I don't want to be as a lecture way. I reserve more time for the questions and answers. So Alex?
Excellent. Thank you so much for this, Flavio. I think it's very insightful to hear your thoughts as to what's happening inside the World Health Organization during quite possibly its craziest point in time ever in the history of the World Health Organization. And with you at the helm of it, I think it's it's in good hands, I have to say. I had a question. There's quite a few questions from the audience, and I'm so glad that you left a good chunk of time here because I think we'll be able to get to quite a few of them. So please for everybody in Matrix chat. Please keep them coming. I think we'll have a lot to talk about here with Flavio, and this is a very rare opportunity. My question to you that, and I'll only ask one because you and I talk and we can always talk offline, but I'm sure others are interested as well. You mentioned DMARC, the importance of DMARC and third parties impersonating the World Health Organization during this health crisis with the coronavirus. Obviously, that's super critical to prevent from the World Health Organization. But with respect to attacks on the WHO, you mentioned there's been a significant uptick all around. Are you seeing more attacks in one area or as opposed to another?
Basically, what we are seeing is we see a continuation of attacks using sophisticated phishing. Multiple APTs doing that, and we see attacks related to application vulnerabilities more and more. So vulnerabilities that we don't know, so 0 day, we saw that happening, but some vulnerabilities that we didn't have the time because the organization is quite large to really address. And that's the reason I mentioned about the red team formation. So we can have external organizations doing penetration testing, and internally also we can really assess the level of weaknesses from the application layer. So, but again, most of the attacks, what we are seeing, it comes from tentatives from phishing, and some of those are quite sophisticated. One that I can stress that it's very important to use safe links and attachments, as I mentioned in my presentation, is a bit.ly shortened URL that is quite tough to educate users. So we need a bit of technology to prevent those, because when the URL is not that clear, and if you have a user that is quite in a hurry, that can happen. So this is what I see.
That's fascinating, and probably a bit of a wake-up call for application developers too, if you think about it like that. I mean, application security has always been important, and I think even more so for an organization like the WHO, and especially when a good chunk of the workforce is probably at home. So very, very difficult to manage all of those endpoints, all of the updates, all of the patching. I completely get it. Staying on the same subject matter as DMARC and email authentication, we have a question from the audience. Actually, it's several questions from the audience in the form of one question. And the first one is, how is availability affected by adoption of DMARC for such a large organization as the WHO? Second one would be, do you consider availability problems as their own security risk? And the third, if we can keep this all in our heads, were you rejecting DMARC failures from the beginning, or did you take a graduated approach? So I think the long and the short of that is summing it all up is, what was the business impact of implementing DMARC?
Fascinating question. So, so let me expand a little bit on the DMARC implementation so you understand. When we decided to explore DMARC, we needed to really understand what was being used and what applications was from were coming from. And we had a good list that we knew off the bat, and we started implementing one by one the DMARC, the DNS configuration. So this was something that we did, but we kind of got lucky in one way, because we wanted to implement DMARC for a long time, but we never had the right time, the right opportunity. And when the number of email increased dramatically, that was the right time and the opportunity. So we work with the communications department of WHO, and WHO needed to send multiple newsletters to journalists globally, and they were having problems in doing that because of the number of impersonations. Our at W2.int was at risk to be considered as malicious. So what we have done, working with the communication department, is to create a subdomain. And this is what I recommend to everyone in terms of implementation of DMARC. Why is that? Because by creating that subdomain, we're able to separate completely the high number of emails, and we enable the policy in 3 stages. 1 week to be only documentation, so P0. The second week, 50%. So 50%. So the first week was I'm accelerating. So let me go back. The first week was only to acquire the information. The second week was to configure it as quarantine. So messages will be quarantined in their target destination based on the policy. And the third week was we configured to be reject 50%. And the fourth week, reject 100%. So by doing that, we created a level of control and investigation, and we could accelerate for that new subdomain because didn't exist, and we will not interfere with the @w2.int. So we could compress those 4 weeks in 2, basically, and we enable that. Then we continue to work on each application to enable the DMARC configuration, and we had most of the applications configured in about 2 weeks, and we created a 2-stage approach because as we configure it, we put the the reporting and the quarantine almost immediately, and so we did in the second week the 50% reject, and the last week on the fourth week, beginning of May, we put 100% reject. So that was very good. Most of systems were okay. Unfortunately, because we couldn't find owners of 2 or 3 systems, we took the because we didn't have an option. We had problems, availability problems for those systems, and we worked later on to enable DMARC for those minor systems. But everybody understood why, and everybody was glad that impersonation was controlled in a 30-day period. So I really recommend to do in stages. Maybe 30 days is too aggressive, but you could do that in 2 months or within 2 months. And I really encourage everyone to do that. So I hope I answered most of those points that you asked.
Yeah, I think you did. I think it's an interesting graduated approach that you took there, and true to form what you had mentioned in your presentation is about sort of, the Nelson Mandela approach to cybersecurity, so to speak, which is changing the behaviors, gradually changing the behaviors. And that's what you did over a period of weeks. I'm sure there were some angry users at some points, but such is life. You have to deal with it, especially when you are trying to prevent impersonation of the WHO. Speaking of subdomains and things of that nature, our next question actually has to deal with the IT departments. So, you also briefly touched upon this, and this is something I dealt with quite a lot in my life as well. And the question is, how can organizations address the potential conflict of interest between information technology and information security when InfoSec folks work within IT? So I think what the question is trying to get at is there an inherent conflict of interest between IT and InfoSec, perhaps when IT's metrics are based on things like uptime and InfoSec departments' metrics are based on patching, updating, and very often in order to secure systems, you may have to take them offline. So I'll let you answer that
one. So this is the classical problem related to risk. So my approach is always bring the risk assessment, and there are degrees of risks. If the vulnerability, for example, happens externally with access to ways to attack and to exploit, so exploitation is available, then even the business owner, as part of the process, agree that the system needs to be taken offline. So this happened multiple times in WHO. So this is part of the behavior change and understanding, but the only way you can achieve that is to tie to the risk management and to make sure that it's quite clear what risk you're willing to take. And so this is one angle to your question. I see other angles. The other angles are related to the quality of the information or type of information and the impact that this may have to the organization. So if you have very sensitive information, that is a very good argument to take systems offline. And the ability to really assess that is the important aspect, and bringing the IT security and the information security glue to the risk management and understanding of the risk from the type of information, from the impact to the organization, and teaching IT about lateral movement, because some people may believe that, oh, but this system is so inoffensive and doesn't have a lot of impact, etc. But when you look at the ability for hackers to jump and to use that system as the bridge, then when they understand that, they are with you. And again, it is all tied to the risk.
There we go. I'm back. So the cohesive tissue there between IT and information security, in your opinion, is really the concept of risk management, putting it all together. And I would guess, as well, properly documenting what that risk is, writing it down, figuring out what that residual risk is, and then how do you mitigate that residual risk, which requires more collaboration between information technology and information security people to begin with. Great questions still coming in here, Flavio, and I'm glad we still have some time. Another question is also sort of about sort of internal issues in politics. So the question is, you mentioned people clicking your phishing link 3 times, then a one-on-one conversation happening at that point. Many times people can become defensive in the situation. How were these conversations handled to avoid that?
No, absolutely. That's sometimes even one click generates the complaint from the user calling me and saying that they will never click again any link because we shouldn't be testing. And over time, and talking with them to make sure that yeah, maybe it is better that they don't click, because if they don't look at, they are exposing the organization to hackers. So so that trying to dialogue with the users in a way that they really understand the situation. But again, after the 3 clicks, that personal conversation starts with, how can you help us to change definitely something is wrong on the language. So how can we adapt our language to show to you how to catch those links that you're clicking 3 times? So it's when you start that conversation asking for their help, it breaks the ice and creates the collaboration. And again, this is part of the human OS. We need to really understand that technology is complicated, and we need to acknowledge that people are doing their best, doing their work, and we cannot require that they are technical people. They need to use things, but they need to understand why they should see what they should see, and somehow training, online training, is not doing all the favor to really understand all the aspects. So we are getting the feedback from them, and that 101 sometimes will do the trick. And the aspect of being tested regularly every year and more than once is another way to do. It's like gymnastics, right? So if you run constantly, run is not really a big problem for you. If you never run and sometimes needed to run, maybe a muscle will be weak. So we need to keep doing the exercises in multiple ways in order for the user to be prepared. So this is how I think.
I can understand perfectly your analogy about needing to run more often. Yes, thank you for that. And going from the sort of the specific individuals to a question more about organizations themselves, I love this next question that we have from the audience here, which is, do you see the WHO in a prime position to push governments all over the world to develop robust, secure portals to consolidate PPE distribution, contact tracing, et cetera, that are, all of these activities that are related to the pandemic itself? So going from individual behavioral changes to organizational and governmental behavioral changes through the WHO.
A great question. WHO, we work for all member states, really. We cannot impose anything to member states. We can make recommendations and have meetings with member states to agree upon those recommendations. And one example, a good example, and I can see here on the chat, contact tracing, for example. This is a great example. WHO developed a contact tracing software, and we shared that capability with member states to really run those contact tracing to enable a much better way to really, especially during the time of Ebola, to really understand all the connections, because through contact tracing, you're able to really manage the distribution of the virus, containment, and all the work that doctors, epidemiologists will perform. So we already do this type of activity, but we have limited resources, right? So we give guidelines, we give specific cybersecurity guidelines multiple times, and we do our best to create those frameworks so each member state can implement at their own capabilities, because each member state may have different limitations, and sometimes even WHO is the hosting of those systems for specific member states.
Speaking of which, and sort of going along the same lines about collaboration and influence, another question is, do you have, and by you, I think, we mean the WHO and perhaps, the office of the CISO within the WHO, do you have important partnerships with other international organizations? I imagine organizations like Doctors Without Borders or UNICEF. I mean, the United Nations, obviously, you've got a unique relationship with them being part of the United Nations. But all of these other IGOs, these intergovernmental organizations that might be facing similar challenges, maybe not as immediate or imminent as the WHO faced in the face of this pandemic. But what's that type of collaboration between international organizations like?
All right. We have multiple groups. One group with all CISOs, it's a close group that we share all the time. Once I receive any signal, any IOC, or they receive, we collaborate. And as part of the UN system, so there's another unit called UNICC that developed a system that we share all the threat intelligence. So we do a lot of that across the UN, and we have smaller groups that are more regional, because there are some attacks that are quite restricted or limited to countries, and we have this type of subgroups. I'm a member of the subgroup in Geneva, because CISOs are next to each other and we get together all the time. So I see UNICEF, I see other organizations, and within the UN we have a complete collaboration. WFP, recently we had integration of systems and using federation of identity in order to enable a dashboard for supply chain for the COVID situation. So we normally do that. And with other organizations that are not UN, we have a slightly different type of collaboration, but we still do. And with partners. So we have multiple other partners that we provide systems to integrate and to being able to mobilize doctors in case of need. So I think from the collaboration point of view, we are doing that for a long time, and this is done well.
It sounds like, there's a lot of efficiencies that are built into the process itself. I mean, and across agencies, do you share things even like, your third-party risk assessments for potential vendors, things like that? I mean, that there's so much time and effort that organizations put into third-party risk assessments. If information like that could be shared on a timely basis amongst international organizations, you would think that resources could be rededicated to something like solving a world health crisis. So that would be something that you would share.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that, and even a simple example of procurement. So within the UN, if we have an RFP, doesn't matter what agency, and if that RFP is done in the last 2 years, we can just piggyback on that RFP and avoid all the time spent in the process, because we follow the UN RFP process, and we can save a lot of time. I'm just giving one example, but on the other example, when we have situations that we get intel, and that intel is shared across the UN as well.
Flavio, to wrap this up, and first of all, thank you so much for your time and sharing this insight into how the World Health Organization has been operating, and your role there, and how things have changed. This is just so incredibly fascinating. The sort of conclusory recapitulation, usual question here is, you've got an audience of the Hackers on Planet Earth community here, glued to the screen. What advice, what requests do you have from this particular community? How can we help? What do you need? Now's your chance.
Thank you. By the way, thank you for the opportunity. I think that is a fascinating opportunity, unique opportunity. And what I can tell you is make sure that if you find anything in any threat or any vulnerability related to the WHO.int, please share it with me. Share it with aggiof@who.int. Very important to get your help. Meaningful information, detailed information. I'm active on LinkedIn, and if you wanted to connect there, more than welcome. And as I mentioned in the presentation, let's together put pressure on the community, the entire community, to enable DMARC. DMARC must be mandatory. And if we all speak that, and if we all put the pressure in Congress, pressure in the internet community, and make sure that DMARC is mandatory, we can alleviate a lot of problems. So those are the two requests that I have. That I think will be quite important. And I'm really thank you for the opportunity, Alex. Hope 2020. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you have any questions, let me know. And if you have any indication of vulnerabilities or attacks, share it with us as quickly as possible.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Flavio. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.